Tonight, let your mind drift far, far away, beyond the ticking of clocks, beyond the glow of screens. Slip quietly into an age when time itself was still young, an age where the desert breathed in silence, and the Nile carried the steady heartbeat of a civilization. The air is warm, fragrant with incense. On the horizon, the first light of dawn spills gold across endless sands. This isn't merely the story of kings, nor of monuments carved to outlast eternity. It is the story of life itself, of people who found the divine in every breath, in every ripple of the river, and in every grain of sacred soil beneath their feet. Here, the gods are not distant watchers. They walk beside you, in the flood and the drought, in the wind and in the quiet whispers of the tomb. They are the rhythm of birth and death, of love and loss, of order and of chaos. Tonight, you'll hear how the world was born, how the sky first kissed the earth, how falcons guarded thrones and jackals guided souls through the dark. These aren't just old myths, they are memories, echoes of a world that once believed the universe itself had a heart. If you're listening to find a little peace, let this ancient story carry you gently. You're welcome to like or subscribe, but only if it truly brings you calm. And as you listen, tell me where you are. What time hums softly around you tonight? There's a quiet comfort in knowing that across oceans and continents, others too are drifting into the same dream. So breathe. Let the noise of the outside world fade. The world beyond can wait. For now, step into the hush of sand, stone, and story, into the timeless realm of Egyptian mythology. The primordial waters and the first god. Tonight, close your eyes and let the world outside fade. Forget the ticking clocks, the buzzing lights, the endless chatter of your mind. Drift into a land and a time so far beyond our modern reality that the very concept of time had not yet been born. This is Egypt before kings, before pyramids, before cities, before even the earth had fully formed. This is a world of whispers and water, silence and shadow, where creation itself was still a dream waiting to be dreamed. In the beginning, according to the oldest tales whispered among priests and scribes along the Nile, there was nothing. Not desert, not sky, not river, not even darkness. Just an infinite quiet expanse of water, stretching endlessly in every direction. The Egyptians called it Nun. It was not alive, not hostile, not welcoming. It simply existed, timeless, bottomless, infinite. And in that still, formless sea, the potential for everything hovered, like a seed yet to germinate. From this profound emptiness, the first spark of existence appeared. The first god, Atum, emerged. He did not come from parents, for none existed. He did not arrive as a child, or even as a creature. He simply was, a god who created himself, standing alone upon a tiny mound that rose above the waters, the first hill, the first island, the first glimpse of land. In the fertile minds of the Egyptians, this was perfectly natural. They knew the Nile's floods brought destruction and renewal together. Fields drowned and homes swept away, only to leave behind the rich, black silt
that made life possible. The river itself was a story of creation, and so their myths mirrored the rhythms of the world around them. Alone, Atum looked over the still waters and felt a desire to create more. And so, with a quiet breath, a sneeze, a spittle, he produced 2 children, Shu, the god of air, and Tefnut, the goddess of moisture. They were small at first, but they carried the essentials of existence: air to breathe, water to drink. Without them, life could not survive. And so the Egyptians wove their myths from the fabric of daily life. The practical need for air, water, earth, and order became the very foundation of the cosmos. Shu and Tefnut, in turn, grew and fell in love, and from their union came 2 more beings, Geb, the god of the earth, and Nut, the goddess of the sky. The world was beginning to take shape. Nut arched her body high above, stretching across the heavens, while Geb lay beneath, heavy with the promise of land and soil. But love and separation are never simple, even among gods. Shu, the god of air, stood between them, holding apart sky and earth, creating the space in which life would eventually flourish. Every breeze that swept across the Nile, every whisper of wind in the reeds, was thought to be Shu's breath, keeping the world balanced. In this unfolding drama of divine creation, the Egyptians saw reflections of their own lives. Order was precious, chaos dangerous. Each god had a role, a duty, a place in the eternal dance of the cosmos. And though these gods were powerful, they were not all-knowing. They moved, they breathed, they felt. Nut longed to embrace Geb, and their separation brought tension, a silent reminder that even the eternal is subject to desire. But the gods did not remain hidden. They shaped the world in ways both majestic and terrifying. Nut gave birth each night to the sun, Ra, who would travel across the sky in a golden bark, bringing warmth and light to the land. Ra's journey was not effortless. He battled the serpents of chaos, navigated the perilous underworld at night, and was reborn each morning, a daily cycle of death and renewal. The Egyptians, farmers and dreamers alike, saw themselves mirrored in this rhythm. Planting, waiting, enduring, and harvesting with faith in the sun's inevitable return. Yet amidst this divine family there were shadows, for the gods' actions were not always gentle or kind. Tefnut, goddess of moisture, sometimes vanished into the desert, her absence bringing drought and fear. Ra, though mighty, was not invincible, and the serpent Apophis constantly threatened to swallow the sun, plunging the world back into chaos. The myths taught that creation is fragile, and life itself is a careful balance between order and disorder. Every flood of the Nile, every dry season, every harvest could be seen as the gods' hand reminding humans of their place in the cosmic order. And so the first chapter of Egypt's story is not one of kings or monuments, but of gods walking among the waters and the earth, of creation emerging from the quiet, infinite sea. Atum, Shu, Tefnut, Geb, and Nut. These were not abstract ideas. They were living, breathing embodiments of the natural world: air, water, earth, sky, the sun, and the cycles that govern life and death. Through their actions, humans learned not only how the world came to be, but how to live within it, how to honor its rhythms, and how to navigate the eternal dance between chaos and order. Tonight, As you listen and let these ancient waters carry you, imagine standing on that first mound, watching Atum rise from the endless none. Hear the first whispers of wind as Shu separates sky from earth. Feel the gentle fall of dew as Tefnut returns to nourish the land. See Nut stretch across the heavens, a vast dome of blue and night. Life itself begins in these moments, in the breath of gods and the silent surge of creation. And perhaps in this quiet, timeless place, you too will understand something the Egyptians knew intuitively, that even in the void, in the stillness and the dark, there is the promise of life, the spark of creation, and the rhythm of a world waiting to be born again.
Ra's journey and the birth of order. As the first light of creation stretched across the Nile, the world began to hum with possibility. The primordial waters of Nun had receded just enough to reveal Atum's mound, and the divine family, Shu, Tefnut, Geb, and Nut, had found their places. Yet the world was still young, and even gods required guidance to transform chaos into a harmonious rhythm. From this need rose the sun god Ra, the radiant eye of creation, whose journey across the sky would come to define the passage of time itself. Ra's birth was not sudden, like the flick of a candle. It was deliberate, a slow unfolding of golden light, piercing the waters of Nun, spilling warmth over the land and igniting the first sparks of life. Each morning, as Ra climbed into the sky on his celestial bark, the gods themselves watched with reverent awe. His light revealed the contours of the land, the stretch of the desert, the sway of reeds along the riverbanks. It brought clarity to the chaos, drawing boundaries between sky and earth, river and field, light and shadow. Yet Ra's journey was fraught with danger. The serpentine Apophis, a creature of endless night and chaos, lurked beneath the waters, waiting to swallow the sun and plunge the world back into darkness. Each day, Ra battled this malevolent force, and each evening he descended into the underworld, carrying the hopes of the living on his radiant shoulders. The Egyptians watched the sun and saw in it a metaphor for resilience. Even in the face of overwhelming darkness, life endures and light returns. It was during these journeys that humans first began to appear in the myths. According to the ancient stories, humanity did not emerge fully formed. Instead, they were born from the sweat and tears of the gods, shaped from clay by the hands of Atum, molded by the blessings of Ra, and given the gift of breath by Shu. Humans inherited the patterns of the divine, the cycles of day and night, the rhythm of planting and harvest, the need to honor Maat, the sacred order that underpinned the cosmos. To live without respect for these cycles was to invite chaos, for the gods' watchful eyes could not be ignored. As humans multiplied, so too did the pantheon of gods. Every river, hill, and valley acquired its own divine guardian. The Egyptians recognized the sacred in all things. The falcon represented Horus, the god of the sky and kingship. The jackal symbolized Anubis, guide of the dead. The ibis embodied Thoth, keeper of wisdom. These gods were never distant abstractions. They interacted with the world intimately, guiding, correcting, and sometimes punishing, but always maintaining the balance that allowed life to thrive. And yet, even among the gods, ambition and rivalry stirred. Ra, though powerful, was not unchallenged. Nut, the sky goddess, longed to embrace Geb, the earth,
and their yearning shaped the heavens and the land. Their children, Isis, Osiris, Seth, and Nephthys, would later play roles of profound consequence, their stories echoing the same themes of love, betrayal, and resurrection that humans themselves would come to know. The gods' lives mirrored those of the people who worshipped them, full of hope, conflict, devotion, and inevitable loss. The Egyptians watched the cycles of the sun and river with reverent attention, recognizing in them lessons for living. The Nile's flooding mirrored the daily rise of Ra. Each planting season reflected the promise of growth, each harvest the reward of patience. Life, the myths suggested, was not random. It was a carefully orchestrated dance, conducted by divine hands, but experienced in tangible ways by every mortal who tilled the fields, raised children, or whispered prayers in the still of night. One of the most enduring lessons of this chapter in the story of Egypt was the importance of Maat. This concept of cosmic order and balance extended to every corner of existence. A well-ordered heart, a just ruler, a society in harmony, these were reflections of the divine balance that Shu, Tefnut, Geb, and Nut had established. Violation of Maat was not merely moral failure, it was a disruption of the universe itself, and the consequences could ripple through both the world of gods and humans. Through it all, the gods taught by example. They loved, they quarreled, they mourned, they celebrated. Ra's daily voyage, the struggle against Apophis, the interweaving of Nut and Geb, the formation of humans, these were not dry lessons. They were narratives alive with feeling, with tension, with the constant reminder that life is precious precisely because it exists within the balance of light and dark, chaos and order, joy and suffering. As night fell, the Egyptians imagined Ra descending once more into the underworld, traversing dark waters in his golden bark. Alongside him sailed other gods, guiding and protecting, preparing for his rebirth at dawn. This nightly journey was both literal and symbolic. It represented the perpetual renewal of the world, the daily triumph of light over darkness, the assurance that even in the deepest shadows, creation would endure. So as you listen tonight, imagine yourself standing along the Nile. Feel the warm, incense-laden air on your skin. Watch as Ra rises, casting golden light over the waters, the first birds stirring in the reeds. Sense the presence of the gods around you, not distant figures, but living forces shaping the land, the sky, and the human heart. In their stories you can trace the origins of everything: the sun, the river, the air you breathe, the earth beneath your feet. And perhaps in the quiet of your own mind you can sense the eternal balance of Maat flowing through the world, steady, unyielding, and endlessly reassuring. Tonight the world feels young again. The Nile whispers secrets older than memory. The gods walk among us, unseen but ever present. And in this timeless story, you too can find your place, a small but vital part of a universe that began in silence, in water, and in the first breath of a self-created God.
When the sky wept for the earth. Close your eyes and drift once more to the time when the world was still finding its shape, when the air hung heavy and the waters of creation were still whispering. From the breath of Shu and the gentle touch of Tefnut came two new beings, Geb, the earth, and Nut, the sky. But they were not simply land and heavens. They were lovers, bound so tightly together that nothing could move between them. Geb's laughter rumbled like thunder beneath the soil, and Nut
arched her body over him, a canopy of stars still unlit. Their embrace was endless, and in that embrace the gods saw something beautiful, yet dangerous. Because where love clings too tightly, life cannot grow. Atum, the father of all, looked down upon them with sorrow and understanding. He knew creation must breathe, and so he called upon his son, Shu, the god of air. He said, "Lift her," he said softly. "Let the sky rise. Let there be space for light to be born." And Shu obeyed. He stood tall, his arms stretching wide, and with a cry that echoed across eternity, he pushed Nut upward, away from Gib. It was the first heartbreak in the universe. Nut's tears fell as stars, scattered across the darkness. Geb groaned, his body trembling, giving rise to mountains and valleys, each one a reaching hand toward the lover torn away from him. Between them, the air shimmered with new life. Light began to dance. Time began to flow. From that separation, the world finally breathed. Day and night took their first steps, and the sky, though far above, never stopped arching lovingly over the earth, as if still longing for that ancient touch. But Nut's sorrow was deep. She went to Atum and begged for one gift, to see her beloved, if only through her children. Atum, moved by her devotion, granted her a strange mercy. He said, "You shall give birth to the gods who will carry your light, but you may not do it under the sun." And thus Nut turned to the night, and in secret, beneath the hush of stars, she bore 5 children: Osiris, Isis, Set, Nephthys, and Horus the Elder. Each one would carry a piece of the cosmos within them, the power of love, of chaos, of protection, and of death's great mystery. The divine family of Egypt was born, and with them began the eternal dance between creation and destruction. So the people of the Nile would look to the heavens each night and whisper to Nut, the Sky Mother, who still bends over her lost love, her body glittering with stars, her endless embrace frozen in light. And they would press their palms to the ground, feeling the heartbeat of Geb, the Earth Father, still rumbling softly beneath their feet. For even in separation, the gods taught them that love, in its truest form, never ends. It only changes shape.
The death of Osiris, the first betrayal. The world was no longer new. The sky had stretched wide, the earth had settled, and the gods had taken their places in the rhythm of life. At the heart of that rhythm stood Osiris, the gentle ruler, god of fertility, of renewal, of life itself. He was everything Egypt dreamed to be, strong yet kind, powerful yet just. Where he walked, the land grew green. Where he spoke, hearts softened. Beside him ruled his beloved sister and wife, Isis, the goddess of magic and wisdom. She was the whisper in the wind, the hidden knowledge of the priestess, the warmth behind every healing touch. Together they reigned not through fear, but through harmony, and the world flourished beneath their care. The Nile rose and fell with Osiris's breath. The crops grew thick with his blessing. Every birth, every harvest, every gentle death that gave way to new life, all belonged to him. And Isis watched over it all, weaving unseen threads of protection around her husband and her people. But where there is light, there is always shadow.
and in that shadow stood Set, Osiris's brother, the god of chaos, storms, and restless desire. Set was not evil by nature. He was wild, untamed, misunderstood. But envy, like sand, finds its way into every crack. He looked upon Osiris's kingdom and saw not beauty, but a throne he believed was his by right. The more Egypt adored Osiris, the deeper Set's bitterness grew. And so, in the stillness of one long, hot evening, he began to plan. A plan of elegance, of cruelty, and of finality. He crafted a chest, not of wood alone, but of precision, carved to the exact measurements of Osiris himself. It gleamed with gold and cedar, inlaid with lapis lazuli and turquoise, a gift no heart could refuse. When the night of the great feast came, Set invited all the gods to celebrate. There was music, laughter, wine, and incense, so thick it blurred the edges of the room. And then, with a smile sharp as a blade, Set spoke. He said, "Let us play a game. Whosoever fits perfectly into this chest shall have it as a gift." The gods laughed and agreed, one by one, trying their luck. None fit, until Osiris, generous and unsuspecting, stepped forward. He lay down inside, and for a heartbeat, everything was silent. Then, with a sudden crash, Set and his followers slammed down the lid, sealing it tight. They poured molten lead along its edges, and before the laughter had even faded, they carried it away and threw it into the dark, eternal waters of the Nile. The chest drifted, turning slowly beneath the moonlight, until it vanished into the distant marshes of Byblos, and with it, life itself began to fade. The Nile stopped flooding, the crops turned to dust, the people whispered prayers into empty air, for the world without Osiris was a world without balance. But Isis did not weep for long. She set out across the lands of Egypt, disguised as a common woman, her heart burning with quiet fury and devotion. Through deserts and foreign shores she wandered, listening to the whispers of birds, the voices of rivers, the sighs of the wind. Every creature seemed to pity her, for even the earth grieved the loss of her king. At last she found the chest, tangled among the roots of a great tamarisk tree in Byblos. The tree had grown around it, embracing the coffin like a mother holds a child. Isis fell to her knees, her hands trembling as she touched the wood. She sang an ancient song, so old that even the stars seemed to pause and listen. With the help of the queen of Byblos, she carried the coffin home in secret. But Set's spies saw all. And one night, when Isis had gone to gather herbs, Set crept into her hiding place. He tore open the coffin, dragged Osiris's body into the moonlight, and in a rage that could shake the heavens, he cut his brother into 14 pieces, scattering them across the Nile Valley. When Isis returned, the silence told her everything. She cried not as a goddess, but as a woman, as someone who had lost the other half of her soul. But even in grief, she did not yield. She swore to find every piece of Osiris, to restore what love had built, even if it defied death itself. So she searched again, through the reeds and the sand, through the temples and tombs, guided by the faithful Nephthys, her sister, and Set's forgotten wife. Piece by piece they gathered Osiris's body, wrapping each fragment with linen and tears. When all was done, she called upon Anubis, the jackal-headed god of the dead, to help her complete the sacred work. He anointed the body with oils, spoke the words of protection, and performed the first ritual of mummification, a promise that death would never be the end. Then, under the silver light of the moon, Isis knelt beside Osiris and whispered the words of life. Her breath touched his lips, and for one miraculous moment, the god of the dead opened his eyes. He could not remain among the living, but his spirit was too powerful to fade. Osiris descended into the underworld, where he became the Lord of the Duat, the judge of souls, the keeper of eternal balance. And from their final union, Isis conceived a child, a falcon-eyed son named Horus, who would one day rise to challenge the god who had torn his family apart. So the priests of Egypt told the people that every flood of the Nile was Osiris's breath returning, that every green shoot was his promise reborn. Death, they said, is not the end. It is only the moment the soul remembers where it came from. And as the night deepened over the desert, the stars shimmered softly. Perhaps Nut was watching herself, weeping quietly for the endless story of love, loss, and renewal.
The Rise of Horus, the Falcon and the Storm. The night after Osiris vanished into the underworld was heavy and long. The moon dimmed as if mourning, and the wind carried whispers through the reeds, the voice of Isis still searching, still calling. In her arms she held not only grief, but life itself, a child conceived from love stronger than death. She fled to the edge of the Nile Delta, hiding among the papyrus swamps. There the goddess of magic became a mother, and the queen of heaven became a fugitive. Each night she whispered to her unborn son stories of his father, of kindness, of courage, of balance. And when he was born, under the thin light of the crescent moon, she named him Horus, the falcon, the sky's heir, the eye that would one day see justice restored. But Set had not forgotten. He scoured the desert for Isis, furious that Osiris's legacy might still live. So Isis disguised herself as a humble peasant woman, and with the help of Thoth, the god of wisdom, hid her child deep in the marshlands. The air was thick with danger. Crocodiles lurked, serpents slid through the reeds, and the desert storms howled like angry gods. Isis protected her son with spells older than time itself. She sang charms that lulled snakes to sleep, and when the child's fever rose, she spoke the secret name of Ra, the sun god, a name no mortal could utter, a name that could heal even the dying. For years, Horus grew in secret. He learned the speech of falcons and the strength of the wind. He watched the horizon every morning, and each sunrise seemed to whisper, "One day you will take back what was lost." Then, when he came of age, he rose from the swamps, tall and sharp-eyed, his body gleaming like burnished bronze beneath the morning light. The falcon god spread his wings, and the desert trembled. Set, the lord of storms, laughed when he heard the boy had come to challenge him. "Let the child try," he roared. "Let him taste the fury of the desert." And so began the great war between Horus and Set, a battle that would shake the heavens and echo across eternity. Their first clash came at dawn. Set arrived as a raging red beast, a storm given shape, half man, half monster, his eyes glowing with fire.
Horus met him as a falcon, wings cutting through the light, his cry sharp as thunder. For days they fought, in the air, across the dunes, in the depths of the Nile where the crocodiles watched in awe. Lightning split the sky, and the gods above paused to see who would rule the two lands. The war was not of weapons alone, but of wills. Sometimes Horus fought with rage, sometimes with mercy. Set, for all his fury, could never truly destroy him. For every time Horus fell, Isis would gather the fragments of her son's spirit, just as she had once done for Osiris. At last, weary and wounded, both gods came before the divine tribunal, a council of the great gods led by Ra himself. They were to decide who would rule Egypt, the god of chaos and storm, or the son of the rightful king. For 80 years the trial dragged on. The gods debated, argued, hesitated. Set pleaded his strength. Horus stood in silence. At times even Isis wept, wondering if justice could ever defeat cunning. Then came the day of truth. Horus and Set were summoned for one final test. They were transformed into hippopotamuses and cast into the Nile. Whoever surfaced first would lose. For days the river churned. Beneath its dark waves the struggle continued, a clash of strength and endurance. Finally, Horus emerged victorious, but bleeding, his left eye torn by Set's claws. That wound became legend. Thoth, the god of wisdom, restored the eye, and from that healing came the Eye of Horus, symbol of protection, sacrifice, and eternal renewal. Ra looked upon Horus and saw in him not just vengeance, but balance. He saw the reflection of Osiris's kindness and the discipline of Isis's love. And so he declared, Horus shall reign upon the throne of the living. Set shall dwell in the desert, guarding the borders of the world. Balance was restored. Order triumphed, but not through destruction, through understanding. Horus ascended the throne of Egypt, his falcon eyes gazing across the land his father once ruled. Every Nile flood was now his promise of renewal, every sunrise his declaration of justice. Yet even in victory, Horus did not forget the storm. He honored Set, not as enemy, but as guardian, for chaos too had its place in the grand design. And thus Egypt learned a truth older than time itself, that peace is not the absence of struggle, but the harmony born when every force, light or dark, knows where it belongs. The priests said that whenever the wind roared across the desert, it was Set keeping his watch. And when the falcons soared high above the valley, it was Horus reminding the world that justice still lives in the sky. And so the story of Egypt continued, not as a tale of war, but of balance, of love that survived death, and of a son who turned grief into harmony. As the sun sank behind the pyramids, its rays painted the sand red and gold, the eternal colors of Horus and Set. And somewhere beyond that horizon, the voice of Isis whispered softly through the wind, "Be still. The world is as it should be."
The journey through the Duat, the soul's eternal passage. When Horus ascended the throne and Set retreated to the desert's edge, the gods grew quiet for a while. Peace settled across the two lands, and the people of Egypt learned to live beneath the steady gaze of the Falcon King.
But even as they tilled their fields and sang to the river, one question lingered in every heart. What happens when life ends? They had seen their kings die, their loved ones fade, and the sun itself vanish each night into the horizon's mouth, only to rise again at dawn. Perhaps, they thought, death was not the end, only another sunrise waiting behind the darkness. And so the story of Osiris did not end with his death or his son's triumph. It was only the beginning of another realm, the shadowed kingdom beneath the earth, known as the Duat. The Egyptians believed the Duat was not a place of punishment or reward, but a mirror of the world above, a vast landscape of caverns, rivers, and gates, where the souls of the dead journeyed toward renewal. And at its heart sat Osiris, serene upon his throne, crowned with white and green, his skin the color of fertile soil, the color of life reborn. When a person died, their spirit, the Ka, left the body, while the Ba, the bird-like soul of emotion and memory, took flight toward the horizon. The living, through prayers and rituals, helped guide it through the perilous journey of the night. First came the weighing of the heart, the most sacred moment in all the afterlife. Before Osiris stood a golden scale. On one side lay the heart of the dead, on the other a single feather, the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth and balance. If the heart was heavy with lies and cruelty, it would sink, and the soul would be devoured by the monster Amit, part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus. But if the heart was light, pure with honesty and compassion, the scales would balance, and Osiris would smile. Then the soul would pass onward, through 12 gates guarded by serpents and spirits, through fields of fire and lakes of stars, until finally it reached the field of reeds, the eternal paradise. There the righteous lived again, farming golden grain, sailing across calm waters, embracing their loved ones in endless morning light. The Nile flowed there too, but its waters gleamed like liquid silver. It was not heaven as we imagine it now. It was something simpler, a perfected Egypt where life continued, without hunger, without sorrow, without end. But the journey was never easy. Even the virtuous needed guidance. That is why the Book of the Dead was written, a sacred map for the soul, filled with spells and passwords. It taught the spirit what to say at each gate, how to call upon the gods for help, and how to avoid the demons who lurked in the shadows. Among those guiding spirits was Anubis, the jackal-headed god who walked between worlds. He was not a god of fear, but of care, the gentle embalmer, the silent guardian. With steady hands he wrapped the dead in linen, whispering words that tied the soul to eternity. And when the funeral boats drifted down the Nile, it was said Anubis himself walked unseen along the riverbank, making sure every journey reached its rightful end. Above all, it was Osiris who awaited them, no longer the fallen king, but the eternal judge, the proof that death could be conquered. Each night, the sun god Ra would sail through the Duat as well, facing serpents of darkness and waters of chaos, only to rise again at dawn, reborn, shining, victorious. The Egyptians saw in this cosmic rhythm the same promise given to them. If the sun can return, so can the soul. Even the pharaohs in their grand tombs were not buried out of vanity, but preparation. Their tombs were portals, carefully painted with stars, lined with food, jewelry, and spells, everything the soul might need for the long voyage. Every hieroglyph carved on those walls was a prayer whispered to the gods. Guide me, protect me, let me walk in the fields of light. And so, death was not something to be feared in Egypt. It was simply another season, another flood of the great river. As the Nile died each year and returned, so too would every soul, washed clean, renewed, eternal. The people believed that every time the sun set behind the western cliffs, it was Osiris opening his gates, and every sunrise was his promise that all would live again. When the priests sang in the temples, their voices echoed through the stone halls like ripples through eternity. Candles flickered, incense curled upward, and in that golden glow, the living and the dead seemed to breathe together. One heartbeat across two worlds. The story of Egypt, they said, was not about how life ends, but how it continues, again and again, like the sun, like the river, like love itself. And if you listen closely on a still desert night, you might hear it, the low hum of eternity, the whisper of the Nile, and the gentle voice of Isis calling softly across the sands. Sleep now. All that lives shall rise again.
The living gods, pharaohs, and the divine order. The sun rises over the Valley of Kings, its first light striking the limestone cliffs like gold on ivory. In the distance, the Nile glimmers, slow, ancient, unbroken. Priests climb the temple steps, carrying incense and lotus blossoms, their white linen robes fluttering like wings. And at the heart of it all, beneath the rising sun, stands a man the people call Pharaoh, the living god of Egypt. To the people, he was not simply a ruler. He was Horus made flesh, the bridge between heaven and earth. His breath carried the will of Ra. His blood shimmered with divine ancestry. When he spoke, it was said the gods themselves listened. And when he died, his soul rose to join the stars, reborn as Osiris, Lord of the afterlife. This idea that the ruler was a god was not born from vanity, but from fear and faith entwined. Egyptians lived in a fragile world. One flood too low, and the crops would die. One storm too strong, and famine would follow. They needed order, Ma'at, the balance between chaos and harmony. And the pharaoh was the living embodiment of that order. He didn't rule just to command. He ruled to keep the cosmos itself from unraveling. Each sunrise symbolized his victory over darkness. Each temple built in his name was an offering of stability to the gods. Every decision he made was thought to ripple through heaven and earth. To rule Egypt was to bear the weight of creation itself. In the early dynasties, pharaohs were buried in mastabas, flat-topped tombs, but soon their ambition, or perhaps their devotion, grew higher. They began to reach for the heavens, constructing mountains of stone to touch eternity. Thus rose the pyramids of Giza, the last breath of stone from men who believed they could rise with the sun. To this day, their perfect symmetry baffles the world, a geometry not of arrogance, but of faith. Each side aligned with the stars,
each passage angled to guide the soul toward the celestial north, where the pharaoh would dwell among the imperishable stars. At night, the workers would rest beside fires, looking up at the half-built pyramid, believing that each stone laid brought them closer to the divine. They weren't slaves, as many imagine, but citizens offering their hands to eternity. To build for the pharaoh was to build for the gods, to take part in the great rhythm of the cosmos. Inside the temples of Karnak and Luxor, priests performed rituals that lasted from dawn until dusk. The statues of gods were washed, clothed, and fed as though they were living beings. Music echoed through the halls, flutes, drums, and chants rising like the beating heart of the nation. And at the center of these ceremonies always was the pharaoh, a figure both human and divine. He offered wine to Amun, bread to Hathor, and prayers to Ra. In return, he was promised prosperity for his people, and his name would be inscribed in gold, so that even when his body turned to dust, his Ren, his sacred name, would never fade. To the Egyptians, a name was more than sound. It was existence itself. To speak a pharaoh's name was to make him live again. And so they carved them deep into temple walls, painted them in hidden tombs, and whispered them during midnight rituals. But time, as always, is a patient thief. Dynasties rose and fell, pharaohs were forgotten, their statues swallowed by sand. Yet somehow, even in ruin, their silence speaks, the stillness of eternity carved in stone. One pharaoh, Akhenaten, dared to break the order. He spoke of only one god, Aten, the sun's radiant disk. He closed the old temples, silenced the priests, and built a new capital where sunlight touched everything. For a moment, Egypt turned its gaze toward the heavens, believing in a single divine source. But the old gods never die quietly. After Akhenaten's death, his name was erased, his temples destroyed, his vision swallowed by the desert winds. The priests restored the ancient order, and the boy king Tutankhamun, his son, was crowned in the name of the old gods. Tutankhamun's tomb, sealed for millennia, would one day be found untouched, filled with gold and lapis and the dreams of immortality. When it was opened in 1922, the world was stunned, not by treasure alone, but by the feeling that something sacred had stirred again after sleeping for 3,000 years. Even now, the pharaohs linger. Their faces, carved, painted, immortalized, stare out from museum glass across oceans. Their words, written in hieroglyphs, still whisper through time. I was here. I ruled beneath the sun. I kept the world in balance. Perhaps that's why the world remains fascinated, not by their wealth, but by their belief. They lived in harmony with something modern minds have forgotten, that every dawn deserves reverence, every death deserves peace, and every name, spoken softly, keeps a soul alive. The pharaohs may have vanished into dust, but in truth, they achieved what they sought all along, a life that would never end. For as long as the Nile flows and the stars wheel over the desert night, their story, their divine order, endures. And maybe if you listen closely, you'll hear it too. The faint echo of a priest's chant, the hush of sand over sacred stone, and the timeless promise whispered through the ages. I am Ra's child. I am Osiris reborn. I am Pharaoh, eternal.
The silence of the gods, when Egypt forgot eternity. The desert remembers everything. Even when the people forget, the sand keeps their secrets. Quiet, patient, eternal. But there came a time when Egypt itself began to forget. The temples that once trembled with the sound of prayer grew silent. The great gods who had shaped the world for millennia began to fade into the dusk. It did not happen all at once. No empire collapses in a single breath. It happens slowly, like the Nile retreating inch by inch from its banks, leaving behind cracked earth where life once bloomed. The old priests of Thebes still lit their lamps to Amun, still washed his golden statue in the first light of dawn. But fewer and fewer came to kneel. The hymns that once echoed through marble halls became whispers in empty air. The Greeks had come. They brought their own gods, their own language, their own restless curiosity. And for the first time, Egypt, land of the eternal, began to change. When Alexander the Great marched through the desert, he stood before the oracle of Amun in the oasis of Siwa. There, in the breathless heat, the priests declared him the son of Zeus Amun, a fusion of Greek and Egyptian divinity. Alexander smiled. He understood the power of faith, the magic of names. If he was seen as divine, Egypt would follow him willingly. And so it did. In his wake came a new dynasty, the Ptolemies, Greeks who ruled as pharaohs, speaking Greek but praying in Egyptian. They wore the crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, stood in temples to offer sacrifices to Isis and Horus, and had their names carved in hieroglyphs beside gods they barely understood. But for all their wealth and marble palaces, something had shifted. The faith was no longer born from the Nile's rhythm. It was being performed, not lived. The gods had become symbols, not presences. And for the first time in thousands of years, the sacred began to feel human. Then came Cleopatra, the last pharaoh, the final echo of divine blood beneath the sun. To her people, she was Isis reborn, the mother, the lover, the goddess in mortal form. To Rome, she was temptation itself, a woman whose voice could bend empires. She spoke 9 languages, worshipped both the Greek and Egyptian gods, and ruled from the city of Alexandria, a city of light, learning, and pride, where the great library held scrolls of every age. But even Cleopatra could not hold back the tide of change. The Romans came, bringing with them new banners, new laws, and new gods. When she died, whether by serpent or by dagger, it was not just the end of a dynasty, it was the end of a world. The gods of Egypt, who had walked beside humanity since the dawn of time, were suddenly without worshippers. The temples grew cold, the statues stared into the wind, and the sand began to creep back over the stones. Centuries passed. Rome turned to new gods, first Jupiter, then Christ. The cross replaced the Ankh. Priests of Isis were driven from their temples, their rituals condemned as superstition. In the city of Philae, on an island surrounded by the Nile, the last sanctuary of the old gods endured. There the priests of Isis continued their sacred rites, even as the empire around them forgot their language. But in the year 537 CE, the final temple was closed by imperial decree. The last prayer to Isis
faded into silence, and just like that, the gods of Egypt fell asleep. The desert reclaimed what was once divine. Sand swallowed columns and doorways. Names once spoken in reverence were buried beneath centuries of wind. But even asleep, they were never truly gone. The gods waited, patient as stone, listening for the world to remember their names again. It took almost 2,000 years for that to happen. In 1799, a French soldier digging near Rosetta found a slab of black basalt covered in strange symbols. The Rosetta Stone. For the first time, the silent language of the pharaohs had a voice again. Through that discovery, the world rediscovered Egypt, its myths, its dreams, its gods. The names of Ra, Isis, and Osiris rose again from the dust. Museums filled with artifacts that once belonged to eternity. Tourists walked where priests once prayed. But what they found was more than history. It was memory, the lingering heartbeat of a civilization that refused to die. Even now, when the wind blows across the dunes of Giza, you can almost hear it, a whisper from the past, soft as breath, saying, "We are still here." Because Egypt was never truly conquered. Its gods were never truly lost. They simply turned to stone, waiting for us to remember their names again. And maybe tonight, as you listen, somewhere far from the Nile, with your eyes half closed and your mind adrift, you are part of that remembering. Each word, each image, each breath is a tiny act of resurrection. So rest now. Let the sand settle. Let the stories sleep beside you, ancient and unbroken. For in dreams, even the forgotten gods wake again.
When the gods awoke, the rediscovery of Egypt. For centuries the sands slept. The pyramids stood like frozen suns, their sharp shadows marking the hours of an empty desert. No songs, no prayers, no incense smoke rising in the dawn. Only silence. And yet, beneath that silence, the old gods waited. They waited through empires and crusades, through storms and centuries. They waited as strangers walked over their buried temples, unaware that beneath their feet the bones of divinity still rested in the earth. Then, one day, the wind shifted. It was the 19th century, the age of explorers, curiosity, and empire. And once again, Egypt began to breathe. It started with wanderers, men in linen coats and wide-brimmed hats, armed with maps, lanterns, and boundless fascination. They came from France, England, Italy, following the Nile upstream, seeking what time had tried to erase. When Napoleon Bonaparte marched into Egypt in 1798, he brought not only soldiers, but scholars, artists, and engineers, men obsessed with the mysteries of the ancients. They mapped the temples, sketched the carvings, measured every pillar and wall, trying to understand a world that had spoken in symbols instead of words. And in their hands one soldier stumbled upon a single stone, a black tablet inscribed with 3 scripts, Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphic, the Rosetta Stone. It was the key to a language that had been silent for almost 2,000 years. When it was deciphered by Jean-François Champollion in 1822, it was as though the mummies themselves exhaled. The gods spoke again. Every wall, every tomb, every relic, their voices returned.
For the first time in millennia, the world could read the words of the pharaohs. Soon after, Egypt became the stage of wonders. The Valley of the Kings was rediscovered, its cliffs shimmering in the desert light, its tombs hidden beneath centuries of sand. And in 1922, one of those tombs changed history forever. Howard Carter, an English archaeologist, pressed his candle into a sealed doorway. Through a tiny crack, he saw gold glimmering in the dark. When asked if he could see anything, he whispered, "Yes, wonderful things." He had found the tomb of Tutankhamun, a boy king dead for more than 3,000 years, now shining again in the modern world. Inside were treasures beyond imagination, chariots, statues, jewelry, and the face of the pharaoh himself, a golden mask gazing out as if from a dream. The discovery sent waves of fascination through the world. Newspapers called it the day the gods returned. Suddenly, Egypt was everywhere, in books, in paintings, in films. Writers spoke of mummies that walked at night, of curses, of forgotten tombs that punished greed. Museums filled with relics that still glowed with mystery. But behind the superstition was something real, a quiet awe. People sensed that the ancient Egyptians had understood something timeless, that life and death were not opposites, but mirrors, that the soul was not a shadow, but a traveler. In London, Paris, and New York, ordinary people lined up to see the artifacts of eternity. They stared into the eyes of statues carved 4,000 years before their birth and felt, for a moment, that they were not so different. By the mid-20th century, the fascination turned into science. Archaeologists, historians, linguists, each trying to peel back another layer of the ancient dream. The temples of Karnak and Abu Simbel were mapped in detail. The mummies were scanned and studied. And yet, even with all our knowledge, the mystery refused to die. Because Egypt was never just about stone and sand. It was about what lies beyond, the unseen, the sacred, the eternal. Tourists still stand before the pyramids, but what holds them in awe isn't the engineering, it's the feeling. That quiet, impossible sense that the air itself remembers something. That perhaps the gods are not gone, only sleeping beneath the surface of time, waiting for the right kind of silence to wake again. In the modern world, we still dream of Egypt. Its symbols live on, the Eye of Horus, the scarab, the Ankh. We wear them on necklaces, tattoo them on our skin, not because we understand them, but because they make us feel connected to something vast. Filmmakers fill screens with pyramids and prophecies. Writers summon gods from the underworld, reimagining them as heroes or monsters. And somewhere between fact and fiction, the truth breathes. That these myths never died, they just changed shape. Even the way we speak of energy, balance, and rebirth echoes the same beliefs once whispered along the Nile. In the age of science, we have, unknowingly, brought back the heart of the old religion, just without the temples. And so, the gods live on, not in statues, but in stories, not in stone, but in our longing to understand what came before. Perhaps that was their plan all along, that even when their names were buried, their essence would endure, woven into the dreams of every generation that came after. If you listen closely, in the hush between breaths, you can still hear them. Ra, rising with the morning sun. Osiris, whispering through the soil. Isis, guarding the weary hearts of mortals. Their voices echo through not temples, but through us, through every question we ask, every mystery we chase, every dream that reaches toward the stars. Because Egypt, in truth, was never just a place. It was a promise that even the forgotten can be remembered, and even silence can speak again.
Eternity remembers the last whisper of the Nile. Night falls over the Nile. The air grows cool, and the desert turns silver beneath the moon. Somewhere in the distance, a reed flute drifts on the wind, a sound so fragile it could be time itself sighing. The river glows faintly in the starlight, and if you stand by its edge long enough, you might imagine it whispering back. The Nile has seen everything. Empires rise and fade, temples crumble, names vanish, and still the river flows on. It carries with it not only water, but memory. They say no civilization ever truly dies as long as someone still remembers its stories. And perhaps that is why Egypt endures, not through its monuments, but through the hearts that still listen. When travelers come to Egypt now, they walk through ancient corridors with cameras and phones. But sometimes, just for a moment, silence takes them. They stop before a wall of hieroglyphics, their hands brushing against the grooves of carved stone, and they feel it, the pulse of something timeless. It's not superstition, it's recognition, a quiet knowing that human beings thousands of years ago stood exactly where they stand now, looked up at the same stars and wondered the same things. What happens after death? Why do we dream? Who listens when we pray? The ancient Egyptians asked those questions, and in answering them, they gave the world a language of eternity. Every god they created was a mirror of life itself. Ra, the burning sun, our will to rise again each day. Osiris, the dying king, our promise that endings are not the end. Isis, the mother, our instinct to protect and to love. Thoth, the scribe, our endless desire to understand. Even Set, the god of chaos, our shadow, our reminder that creation needs its storms. To them, the universe was alive, every wind a breath, every river a vein, every star an eye that watched the unfolding of destiny. Perhaps that's why their civilization lasted so long. They didn't see divinity as something distant, but as something woven through everything. They lived not beside their gods, they lived within them. In modern times, we call their beliefs mythology, as if they were only stories. But what if those stories were something deeper, a language we've forgotten how to hear? When you listen to the rhythm of the river, or stand beneath a sky so vast it makes you small, you begin to understand what they knew, that eternity is not somewhere else. It's here, in the cycle of sunrise and sunset, in every heartbeat, every tear, every quiet act of hope. That's the secret the pharaohs tried to carve into stone, that life and death are not enemies, but companions in the same endless dance. Some nights, the wind over the desert still carries a strange sound, like a sigh or a memory half remembered. The locals say it's just the sand shifting, but travelers who've listened closely swear they've heard whispers, ancient words carried by time. They say it sounds like names. Ra, Osiris, Isis, names once spoken by millions of voices, now murmured by the earth itself. And maybe they're right. Maybe the gods never left. Maybe they became the stars,
their eyes still watching the river they once ruled. Because even now, when the sun rises over the eastern cliffs, it rises in the same place it did 5,000 years ago. The light falls on the same stones, the same warmth touches the same river, and the Nile, unchanged, eternal, still flows toward the sea. In museums far away, behind glass and gentle light, the relics of Egypt rest. Golden masks, painted coffins, papyrus scrolls, each one a fragment of a dream that refused to die. Visitors walk past them in awe, some whispering, some weeping quietly, as if the air around them still carries the scent of incense. And perhaps it does, because these objects were never made for display. They were made as prayers, to bridge the mortal with the divine. And somehow, even thousands of years later, they still do. The greatest miracle of Egypt isn't its pyramids. It's that it taught the world how to remember, how to look beyond time and still feel connected to something infinite. Every story told, every song sung, every whisper of fascination in the modern world is an act of resurrection. Each listener becomes part of the same chain, stretching back to the farmers, the priests, the builders who once sang as they raised stone to sky. They are gone, but their rhythm continues, through us. So tonight, as this story draws to a close, breathe slowly. Feel the stillness settle around you. Imagine the stars above Egypt, bright and unblinking, their light crossing thousands of years just to reach your eyes. That's eternity, not a place, but a connection. The gods are no longer carved in stone or painted on walls. They live in the stories we tell, in the wonder we feel, and in the peace that comes from remembering. So rest now. Let the Nile carry your thoughts to the horizon. Let the ancient world drift gently through your dreams. Because somewhere, in the hush between night and dawn, when the wind moves softly over the sand, the old gods whisper still. We never left. We are memory. We are light. We are forever.
The dreamers of the desert, when mortals touched the divine. The desert sleeps beneath an ocean of stars. Its silence is not emptiness, it's listening. Each grain of sand holds the echo of footsteps long vanished. Each gust of wind carries the breath of forgotten prayers. And if you stand still, truly still, you might feel what the ancients once felt, that the earth beneath you is alive, and it remembers. For in Egypt, to dream was not to escape reality, it was to enter it more deeply. The priests of ancient temples believed dreams were a bridge between worlds. When the body slept, the soul slipped loose, wandering into the divine realms where the gods whispered truths too bright for waking eyes. To them, dreams were sacred messages, prophecies, warnings, blessings. The Temple of Serapis in Memphis once had entire chambers devoted to sleep. Travelers came from distant lands, Greece, Nubia, Phoenicia, to lay their heads upon cool stone floors and surrender themselves to divine visions. Incense burned in long curls, and the air shimmered with quiet chanting. They called it incubation, a holy ritual of holy dreaming. And in the morning, when the first light spilled through columns of sandstone, they would awaken, some in tears, some trembling, some forever changed. There's a story carved faintly on an ancient stele. It tells of a young man who dreamt of the god Thoth,
the scribe of the gods, keeper of wisdom. In his dream, Thoth placed a quill in his hand and told him, "Write what the world forgets." When he awoke, he became one of Egypt's great storytellers, a humble scribe whose papyrus scrolls outlived every monument of stone. No one remembers his name, but his words still breathe in the ink of time. Perhaps that is what Thoth meant, that memory itself is divine. In another story, a pharaoh dreamed of a lion that spoke. The beast promised him kingship if he cleared the sand from its resting place. The next morning, the young prince ordered the dunes removed, and beneath them the great Sphinx emerged, its gaze eternal, its body reborn. Dreams in Egypt were not illusions, they were maps, showing mortals how to walk between fate and faith. Even now, when travelers sleep by the Nile, some claim to see strange visions. A woman with wings of light, a man with a falcon's head, a boat gliding through stars. They wake unsure if it was a dream or a memory that wasn't theirs. Perhaps the old souls still wander, seeking listeners who remember their language. To dream, the Egyptians believed, was to open a door, and every door led toward Maat, the divine order that kept the world from falling into chaos. A dream wasn't judged by how real it felt, but how true it was to the heart. And so they wrote down their dreams on papyrus, in careful hieratic script, so that future generations could learn from them. Some spoke of rivers of fire, others of golden fields beyond death, but every one of them shared the same ending: peace. For in Egypt, the goal of life was not glory, it was harmony. When night settled over Thebes or Memphis, families gathered by the soft glow of oil lamps. Elders told tales of gods visiting mortals in dreams, of lovers reunited beyond death, of battles fought not with swords, but with the spirit. Children would listen, eyes heavy with sleep, and as they drifted off, they too would carry the stories into their dreams, weaving them into something new, something eternal. It's strange how time changes everything and nothing. We no longer sleep in temples. We no longer pray to Thoth or Ra. Yet we still close our eyes each night and hope that sleep will show us something beautiful, something true. And maybe it does. Maybe the gods still whisper, just in different tongues, in the hum of a city at midnight, in the rhythm of rain against a window, in the pulse of music that makes your heart ache. Because what the Egyptians understood, what they built their entire faith upon, was that the divine doesn't vanish. It changes form. It hides in the quiet, waiting for someone to listen. So tonight, as you drift into your own dreams, remember this: you're not escaping the world, you're joining it. You're walking the same invisible bridge that pharaohs and priests once crossed, chasing the same light, hoping for the same peace. The dreamers of the desert still walk beside you. You may not see them, but somewhere in that thin veil between waking and sleep, you are all the same travelers, following the same ancient stars.
The desert is not empty. Beneath its golden stillness lies a city of ghosts, men and women who carved eternity with their hands. They were not kings, not priests, not warriors. They were builders of the afterlife. Their village was called Deir el-Medina, a place hidden in the cliffs west of Thebes, where the living built homes for the dead. By day, they shaped the tombs of pharaohs. By night, they dreamed of gods. When dawn spilled over the desert, the workers walked in silence toward the Valley of the Kings. The sun rose behind them, always behind, for to face west was to face death. They carried chisels, copper tools, small jars of ochre and lapis, gifts of color for walls that no living eye was meant to see. Inside the mountain, the air was cool and heavy, thick with the sound of hammers against limestone. Each strike echoed like a heartbeat, a slow pulse of devotion that lasted lifetimes. They believed that what they carved wasn't just decoration, it was resurrection. Every god they painted, every spell they etched was a map to guide the soul through the afterlife. They called the tomb Per-Jet, the house of eternity. And for them, eternity was real. In the narrow tunnels, torchlight flickered across walls painted with stories. Ra, sailing through the underworld in his golden boat. Osiris, sitting in judgment, his green face calm and eternal. The heart of a man weighed against a feather of Ma'at, the balance between truth and chaos. The workers knew these scenes by heart. They had whispered them for generations. But still, each stroke of the brush was reverent, as though they were painting prayers. They believed that what they carved wasn't just decoration, it was resurrection. Every god they painted, every spell they etched, was a map to guide the soul through the afterlife. They called the tomb Per-Jet, the house of eternity. And for them, eternity was real. At night, back in their small homes of mud brick, they gathered under the stars. They told stories of what waited beyond the veil, the field of reeds, a paradise where the dead walked again, where crops grew forever green, and loved ones reunited in endless sunlight. And yet they were not blind to sorrow. They knew life was fragile. The desert could take everything, and often did. So they learned to make beauty from impermanence, to build something lasting even when their own names would be forgotten. One of them, a man named Sennacherib, was buried in his own tomb not far from the valley. When archaeologists opened it thousands of years later, the walls still glowed with color, the paint fresh as morning. Scenes of his family working the fields of the afterlife, his wife beside him smiling. Above them, the goddess Nut spread her starry arms to hold the sky together. Sennacherib's tomb was small but perfect, a whisper of devotion preserved in silence. It reminds us that immortality was never about power. It was about peace. The builders were paid not in gold, but in bread, beer, oil, and linen. Sometimes their wages came late, and when they did, these men who built palaces for gods laid down their tools and refused to work. The world's first recorded strike happened here, beneath the cliffs of Thebes. Even eternity, it seems, needed justice. Yet for all their struggles, they believed their craft sacred. Each tomb was a promise that life continued, that the sun would rise again, that death was only a doorway. When one of them died, the others gathered to recite the Book of the Dead. They spoke the names softly, for to speak a name was to keep it alive. The desert wind would carry the sound away, but the gods, they believed, would hear. Imagine it now.
The flicker of oil lamps deep underground, the scent of stone dust and myrrh, the slow rhythm of chisels echoing like breath. They weren't just carving walls, they were carving time itself, turning the fleeting moments of human life into something the gods could recognize. And when the work was done, when the tomb was sealed, they left offerings, bread, beer, amulets, flowers, tokens of love for the soul that would travel beyond. Then they turned away, their footprints fading back into the sand. The silence closed in again, and eternity began its vigil. Even now, when the wind sweeps through those valleys, it carries whispers of hammer blows, songs in forgotten tongues, the laughter of workers who believed they were shaping forever. They were right, for in every brushstroke, every hieroglyph, they left something of themselves, a heartbeat in stone. And as long as those colors still glow beneath the desert sun, they are not gone. They are waiting for us to remember that we too build our own houses of eternity, not in limestone, but in love, in memory, in story.
The mirror of the moon, love and magic in the time of Hathor. The desert knows silence, but the night knows music. And on certain nights, when the Nile shimmered like liquid glass and the palms swayed softly against the wind, you could almost hear it, the hum of something older than song. They said it was Hathor's laughter, the goddess of love, beauty, and joy. She danced in moonlight, her eyes the color of honey, her crown shaped like a golden sun cradled between cow's horns. Wherever she walked, flowers bloomed, hearts softened, and sorrow forgot itself. Hathor was more than beauty. She was balance. Where the harsh sun of Ra could burn, her gentleness healed. She was the mirror that reflected life's sweetness back to those who had forgotten it. In a land ruled by death and resurrection, Hathor reminded people that to live, truly live, was itself sacred. She was the goddess who welcomed souls into the next world with music instead of mourning. Temples to her rose along the Nile, their walls carved with dancers and musicians, harpists with soft smiles, women pouring perfume that never faded. And when the full moon climbed over the desert, the people believed Hathor herself was watching, her reflection rippling in the river's silver skin. One story tells of how Ra, the great sun god, once grew weary of humankind. Their hearts had turned cruel, their prayers hollow. So he sent his eye, his wrath, to punish them. That eye became Sekhmet, a lioness of fire and fury. Her hunger was endless, her rage devoured villages. But when Ra saw the destruction, he wept for what he had done. To save creation, he transformed Sekhmet into Hathor, anger into compassion, flame into light. And from her first gentle breath, the world exhaled again. Hathor taught Egypt that even the fiercest pain can be reborn as tenderness, that every heart, no matter how wounded, can still remember how to dance. At Dendera, her temple still stands, its ceiling painted like the heavens, stars in turquoise, zodiac signs spiraling toward infinity. The columns are carved with her face, serene, smiling, eternal. The priestesses there believed she could cross all boundaries between life and death, man and woman,
God and mortal. She was love itself, shapeless, timeless, untamed. Love in Egypt was not hidden in poetry. It was carved into stone. Ancient scribes wrote of girls with voices sweeter than lotus wine, of men who trembled when their beloveds walked past. One poem reads, "My heart flutters like a dove at the sound of her steps. She has captured me in her snare of hair. I am her servant, gladly." Their love was not quiet, it was worship. And in that worship they felt close to Hathor. The goddess also ruled over music and magic. Priestesses played sistrums, bronze rattles shaped like her temple gates, believed to summon joy and drive away sorrow. In rituals, they sang songs that never sought perfection, only sincerity. To please Hathor, you didn't need a flawless voice, you needed a full heart. When lovers quarreled, they prayed to her for reconciliation. When children were born, mothers thanked her for the gift of life. When someone died, they asked Hathor to guide the soul gently, with laughter instead of fear. But love, even divine love, has shadows. There's a story of Hathor falling in love with a mortal musician. He played his lyre on the banks of the Nile, his songs so tender that even the stars leaned closer. For a time she visited him each night, her form half human, half light. But mortals are fragile things. When he grew old, she could no longer bear to see him fade. And so one night she kissed his forehead, and he simply dissolved into starlight. They say that's why the Milky Way curves across the Egyptian sky, a river of souls born from love too great to die. To the Egyptians, that story was not tragedy, it was truth. Because to love, they believed, was to touch eternity. And maybe that's why, even now, the ruins of Hathor's temples still hum softly in moonlight. Travelers who camp nearby swear they hear faint laughter, the rustle of silk, the distant rhythm of a sistrum echoing through the air. It might just be wind, or maybe it's the goddess, still reminding the world that joy, too, is sacred. When you listen to the music of the night, the quiet pulse of your heart, the soft sigh of the wind, the whisper of your own thoughts, remember Hathor. She is there in the pause between breaths, in the warmth that lingers when someone holds your hand, in the small peace that settles before sleep. She was the mirror of the moon, and she still reflects us all. The Falcon and the Throne. The Rise of Horus. The wind changes over the desert. It no longer whispers. It watches. The air feels heavier, sharper, as if the gods themselves are holding their breath. For the time of peace has ended. The throne of Egypt stands empty, and the gods are at war. Once Osiris ruled the earth, a king of balance, wisdom, and mercy. Under his hand the Nile flowed steady, the fields bloomed, and the people knew harmony. But Osiris had a brother, Set, Lord of the Red Desert, a god of storms, of thunder, of restless ambition. He watched his brother's gentle reign with envy and mistook kindness for weakness. So, one night, he devised a game. Set invited Osiris to a grand feast. There was laughter, wine, music, and in the center of the hall, a chest made of the finest cedar, inlaid with gold. Set smiled and said, "Let this gift be to whomever fits it perfectly." One by one, the guests lay inside, too tall, too short, too broad. And then Osiris, modest, trusting, slipped in. It fit him perfectly. Before anyone could move, Set slammed the lid shut. He poured molten lead over the seams, sealed the chest, and hurled it into the Nile. The river swallowed its king whole, and the world went silent. Isis, wife of Osiris, searched day and night, through swamps, deserts, villages. She followed the whispers of fishermen and the cries of birds. She was not merely a goddess of magic. She was the very embodiment of devotion. At last she found the chest, washed ashore among reeds. She wept, her tears filling the marshes, turning them into the lush delta Egypt would forever depend on. But Set was not done. In a rage, he tore Osiris's body into pieces and scattered them across the land. Isis did not despair. With her sister Nephthys, she gathered each piece, each fragment of love and memory, and through ancient magic, she reassembled him. She breathed upon him the words of life, and for a moment, just a moment, Osiris opened his eyes. From their union came a child, a son of resurrection, a god born not from life, but from love defying death. His name was Horus. Horus was raised in secret, hidden among reeds and lotus by the Nile. Isis nursed him under the shadow of her wings, teaching him patience, mercy, and purpose. For she knew that one day he must face the storm that murdered his father. When he was grown, the gods gathered in judgment. The throne of Egypt could not remain unclaimed. Set stood tall and fierce, his eyes like black fire. Horus stood silent, young, calm, but unshakable. The council of gods was divided. Some favored order through strength, others through wisdom. The trial of the gods began not in a hall, but across the land itself. Set challenged Horus to a series of contests. They fought as men, as falcons, as crocodiles in the river. They raced boats made of stone. They wrestled beneath the eyes of Ra. Each time the balance tipped, then righted itself again. For Egypt was not meant to be ruled by chaos, nor destroyed by vengeance. It was meant to endure. And so the struggle became more than war. It became mythic balance, the eternal dance between light and shadow, storm and sky. In the final trial, Set blinded Horus in one eye, his strike so fierce it split heaven. But Thoth, the wise scribe, healed it, and from that wound came the Eye of Horus, symbol of protection, power, and restoration. Even today, its shape watches from amulets and jewelry, a reminder that no wound is ever beyond healing, and no loss beyond renewal. At last, the gods rendered judgment. Ra rose from his golden boat and declared Horus the rightful heir. Set was not destroyed, for even chaos had its place in the balance of Maat. Instead, he was sent to guard the desert, to roar his storms far from fertile land. And Horus ascended the throne, the falcon king, his wings stretched across heaven. The Nile flowed green again, the crops arose, and the people sang songs of light after darkness. They said that each pharaoh who ruled afterward was not merely a man, but Horus reborn. Every coronation echoed that ancient battle, the promise that order would always rise again. And so, when the sun lifts itself from the horizon, when the falcon soars over the river, when the storm yields to calm, it is Horus returning, the child of hope, the heir of justice. And maybe, somewhere in all of us, he still lives. That quiet will to rise again after loss, to find purpose in pain, to turn wounds into wisdom. Because the Egyptians understood something eternal, that the sky and the storm were never enemies. They were reflections of each other. And only together could the world stay whole.
The eye of Horus, light that never dies. The desert sleeps again. The storms have drifted into memory, and the Nile hums softly like a lullaby sung by the earth itself. Above it all, the falcon soars, his wings carved in gold across the sky, his shadow touching both temple and tomb. This is Horus, the Avenger no more. He has reclaimed his father's throne, but now must learn what it truly means to rule. Because power, the Egyptians believed, is not the ability to strike, it is the wisdom to see. There was once a night when Horus could not see at all. His eye, torn from him by Set's fury, had fallen into darkness. They say it sank beneath the desert sand, where the wind buried it, grain by grain, until it became part of the earth itself. The gods mourned, for even in victory there was sorrow. How could a ruler bring light to the world when part of him still lived in shadow? It was Thoth, the god of wisdom, who found the answer. He descended into the silence where broken things go, a place between breath and death, between memory and forgetting. And there, glowing faintly beneath the dust, he found it, the lost eye, pulsing softly like a heartbeat waiting to return. He took it in his hands and whispered words that had not been spoken since creation. He spoke of order, of truth, of the endless turning of the stars. And with each word, the eye began to shine again. When Thoth placed it back upon Horus's face, something changed. The god did not see as he once did. He saw everything. He saw the tears of Isis falling into the Nile, the laughter of children in the fields, the pain in Set's heart, and the fragile beauty of balance itself. The eye of Horus was no longer just an eye. It was vision reborn through suffering. It was the light that refuses to die. From that moment, the symbol became sacred. The Egyptians called it Wedjat, the Whole One. They painted it on tombs, carved it on amulets, and placed it over the hearts of the dead. They believed it could heal any wound, protect any traveler, and guide every soul through the dark. To wear it was to carry the promise that no matter how deep the night, the dawn would always return. But to the priests of Ra, the eye meant something even greater. It was not just Horus's eye, it was the sun itself. Each morning, when the golden light rose from the horizon, they said it was the eye opening, watching over the living, blessing the land, and driving away the chaos of the night. Each evening, when the sun dipped below the west, it closed again, descending into the underworld to keep the dead company until morning. Thus, day and night were not enemies, but lovers in an endless embrace, one giving way so the other could rise. The cycle never ended.
Light was never destroyed, only transformed. In the grand temple of Edfu, priests still whispered the hymn of the eye. You are the flame that burns in darkness, the tear that heals the wound, the Urkel unbroken, the heart that sees the world. They lit lamps shaped like eyes, their oil shimmering gold, so that even when the night fell, the symbol of sight would never fade. But for Horus, the lesson was more personal. He had conquered his enemy, but learned that true victory was not in revenge, it was in understanding. He had seen Set's jealousy, his loneliness in the desert. He understood now that even chaos has its reason, that sometimes destruction is only creation misunderstood. So he forgave him, not aloud, but in the way the Nile forgives the storm, through acceptance, through flow. And in that forgiveness, the world finally healed. The eye of Horus became a bridge between God and man, life and death, darkness and dawn. Sailors painted it on their boats so the waves would not swallow them. Mothers drew it on their children's wrists to keep fever away. Pharaohs wore it over their hearts when they stepped into the afterlife. It became more than myth. It became memory. Thousands of years later, even when temples turned to dust and languages were forgotten, the symbol endured. You can still find it today in jewelry, tattoos, paintings, a single eternal eye watching quietly from the corners of the modern world. Most who wear it don't know the whole story. They only feel its comfort, that strange calm, as if someone ancient still watches over them. Perhaps they are right. Perhaps somewhere in a place between stars and sand, the falcon still flies. Perhaps his eye still opens each morning, not in heaven, but in us, each time we choose to forgive, to see the world with compassion, to rise once more after we fall. And so the Egyptians' oldest truth lives on, that light once born can never truly die. It only changes form, passing from gods to men, from sunrise to heartbeat, from ancient story to dream. The eye of Horus still sees, and as long as it does, the world will never be blind.
The Book of the Dead, Doors to Eternity. Night settles softly upon the Nile. The air is heavy with myrrh and lotus, and the stars shimmer like golden hieroglyphs written across the sky. In the distance, torches flicker in the Valley of the Kings. A priest whispers ancient words over a sleeping body. The desert wind listens. For this is not merely death, it is departure. To the Egyptians, dying was not the end of life, but a doorway to another realm, a place that mirrored the living world, yet existed beyond its sands. They called it Duat, the underworld, the hidden land of stars and silence. In every tomb, beneath the weight of stone, they placed a map, not drawn in ink, but written in magic. It was a collection of spells, prayers, and instructions, each one designed to help the soul make its way through the dangers of the afterlife. They called it the Book of Coming Forth by Day. We know it as the Book of the Dead. It wasn't a book in the modern sense, more like a sacred travel guide for eternity. Each papyrus scroll was handmade, each line a spell, each image a door. The journey began with the soul awakening, its spirit, called the Ka, rising gently from the still body. The Ka would stretch, confused at first, still tethered by love and memory to the world it left behind. Then the priest's words would echo in the air. Awake, O noble one, rise and walk into the light of Ra.
And so began the journey through the Duat. The Duat was no simple path. It was a world of shadows, filled with rivers of fire, serpent gates, and spirits that tested the heart. But it was also breathtaking. Fields of golden wheat that never withered, lakes that shimmered beneath eternal twilight, and stars that sang like crystal bells. Guiding the soul through this vast realm was Anubis, the jackal-headed god, silent, patient, and kind. He was not the god of death. He was the guardian of passage. He took the soul by the hand, leading it through the shifting sands to the hall of two truths, the place of judgment. The hall was enormous, lined with the thrones of 42 divine judges, each watching in still silence. At the far end stood Osiris, clothed in white, crowned with green and gold, his presence calm as the Nile after flood. And before him stood the scales. On one side, the heart of the deceased. On the other, the feather of Maat, the goddess of truth and order. The heart was not just an organ. It was the seat of memory, morality, and love. It carried every secret thought, every kindness, every cruelty. Anubis adjusted the scales, his golden eyes unreadable. The room held its breath. If the heart weighed heavier than the feather, it meant the soul had been corrupted by lies and greed. In that case, the monster Amit, part lion, part crocodile, part hippo, would devour it whole. But if the heart was light, if it had lived in harmony with Ma'at, then the soul was declared true of voice. The hall would echo with Thoth's words, "He has been found pure. He shall live forever among the stars." For those who passed the test, the journey did not end. It simply transformed. They sailed across the heavenly river on a bark of light, joining the sun god Ra as he journeyed through the night sky. Every dawn, when the first rays touched the horizon, it was believed those souls rose with him, reborn, radiant, bringing the day to the living world once more. This was not just religion, it was the architecture of peace. It told people that their lives mattered, that justice mattered, that even in the vastness of death, they were never alone. Inside the tombs, artists painted these beliefs with delicate care. Walls shimmered with blue and gold. Ra's solar bark sailing through stars, Anubis guiding souls, Osiris opening the gates of eternity. And across every surface, the same prayer appeared again and again. May my heart not betray me. May I walk among the blessed forever. May I come forth by day. It was both hope and confession, a promise to the universe that one had tried to live truthfully. To the Egyptians, the afterlife wasn't somewhere distant. It was a reflection, a mirror of this world, but purified of pain. The fields were called the Fields of Reeds, a paradise of endless harvests, where the departed worked not from need, but from joy, sowing, reaping, laughing under eternal sunlight. Families reunited, pets ran freely, the Nile flowed forever. To them, heaven was not an escape, it was home restored. Thousands of years later, when archaeologists unrolled those ancient scrolls, the ink still glowed faintly, as if the words themselves refused to die. And perhaps they haven't, because when you whisper to a loved one's memory, when you light a candle in silence, you are doing what they once did, believing that life continues just beyond what we can see. The Book of the Dead was not a story of fear. It was a song of continuity, a promise that the soul endures, guided, tested, forgiven, and reborn. And in the hush of the tomb, beneath the weight of eternity, you can almost hear them still, the voices of priests, the echo of ancient hearts, whispering across time, "Do not be afraid of the dark. The light knows your name."
The journey of Ra, the sun that never sleeps. The horizon glows faintly, a pale whisper of light against the desert sky. The day has ended, but the sun is far from finished. It is time for Ra to travel, not through open skies, but through the hidden river of night, the underworld itself. For the Egyptians, the sun was alive. It was not merely a star, but a god who worked tirelessly, never resting, never faltering. Ra sails in his solar bark, a vessel of gold and cedar, its prow carved with protective spells. Around him are guardians and companions, Horus as the falcon, Sekhmet as the fierce lioness, and other deities whose names have been whispered only in temple shadows. The journey is not peaceful. At every turn lurks danger. Apep, the great serpent of chaos, coiling through the darkness, its mouth wide enough to swallow the sun itself. But Ra does not flee. He does not falter. With each stroke of the bark's oars, he drives the serpent back, turning night's terror into light's triumph. The underworld is a world apart, rivers of fire, walls of darkness, spiraling corridors where the dead wander, waiting to see if they are worthy. Stars hang like lamps overhead, casting pale silver reflections upon the strange landscapes. Ra knows them all. Every demon, every whispering shadow, every shape that seeks to disrupt the cosmic order. And yet, he does not strike in anger. He moves with rhythm, with purpose, knowing that even chaos has its role. Alongside Ra is Ma'at, goddess of truth and order. She guides the bark with her feather, a delicate instrument that keeps the universe balanced. Her presence reminds the Egyptians that light is only meaningful when it passes through shadow, that every day is precious precisely because night exists. Without darkness, Ra cannot shine. Without challenge, creation cannot endure. During this passage, Ra meets the souls of the dead. They look upon him with reverence, offering their memories, their gratitude, their prayers. Some are kings, adorned with crowns and gold. Some are humble farmers, carrying nothing but their labor and love. All are equal in his gaze. This nightly communion ensures the continuation of life. The living draw sunlight, warmth, and growth. The dead receive passage, safety, and transformation. Even the smallest prayer can ripple across the universe. Even the faintest act of gratitude can help keep chaos at bay. Apep strikes often. The serpent coils around the bark, trying to crush it, trying to extinguish the light. The gods do not panic. Horus dives from above, his wings cutting the shadows. Sekhmet roars, a vibration that shakes the underworld. Together, they strike, push, and resist. The night may be long, but the sun is relentless. And when Apep retreats, the bark continues its journey, moving ever closer to the dawn. During this passage, the Egyptians imagined stars as the souls of those who had passed Ma'at's judgment. They shimmered like lamps, guiding Ra, keeping him company in the vast, silent darkness. The moon itself was not separate. It followed as a quiet companion, reflecting light,
and marking the hours until the sun would rise again. Every night was a test of resilience, every dawn a reward for persistence. The Egyptians drew this voyage in tombs and temples, halls adorned with serpents, stars, boats, and gods. Paintings shimmered with red, gold, and blue, a map of the underworld for the living and the departed. To them, the sun's nightly struggle was more than myth, it was a lesson. The world is constantly in motion, light and dark, creation and destruction, life and death, they are inseparable. Balance is not static, it is earned through vigilance and courage. Even now, when the sun dips behind a distant horizon and shadows stretch across the land, you can feel Ra's journey. It is the pulse of the universe, the rhythm that has never faltered. And perhaps in quiet moments you can sense his bark moving across the invisible rivers of night, a silent promise that light will always return, that hope endures, that the world is held by hands both seen and unseen. To the Egyptians, this daily passage was sacred. It reminded them to honor both day and night, to recognize that struggle is not defeat, and that each morning carries renewal. They measured their lives by Ra's voyage, planting, harvesting, loving, praying, each act part of the endless rhythm. The God's cosmic order was mirrored in every heartbeat, every breath, every action. Even death was not an interruption, it was a continuation. Tonight, as you close your eyes, think of the sun's bark gliding through darkness. Feel the steady pulse of courage, the quiet victory of perseverance. Know that even when storms coil around you, even when shadows press close, there is a journey, a rhythm, and a light that never sleeps. Ra sails still, and as he rises, so too does the promise of a new day.
The lovers of the Nile, Isis and Osiris reunited. The Nile flows endlessly, its waters whispering secrets that have survived millennia. It is quiet now, save for the soft lapping of waves against reed beds and stone banks. But once, it carried the greatest story of love and devotion the world has ever known. Osiris, king and judge, lay scattered across the land, torn by his jealous brother Set. Yet even in death, he was never truly gone. His body, once reassembled by Isis, pulsed with the slow rhythm of resurrection. Isis, the goddess of magic, motherhood, and devotion, had searched tirelessly, through marshes where crocodiles hid, through deserts that shimmered with heat. She gathered every piece of him, not just flesh, but essence, memory, and spirit. Each fragment she touched became holy. Each whispered prayer became a bridge between life and death. The union of Isis and Osiris was not merely romantic, it was cosmic. Through their love, the seasons moved, the Nile flooded in its cycle, and crops grew to sustain generations of humanity. The world itself depended on their reunion. Night after night, Isis tended to Osiris. She chanted spells older than kingdoms, tracing his body with sacred oils, filling the air with the scent of myrrh, lotus, and honey. Her tears fell into the river, nourishing the land, turning sorrow into fertility. And slowly he returned, not fully as before, but transformed, a god of death and life, of judgment and rebirth, a presence both fearsome and tender. Together,
They demonstrated the eternal cycle. Death was not an end, but a beginning. Love did not vanish with mortality. Even after betrayal, cruelty, and chaos, the heart could find its way back to union. From their reunion came life anew. Horus was born, not merely as a child, but as the embodiment of hope, justice, and the future. In him the generations of mortals found courage, the promise that wrongs could be set right, and that light would always return to a world shadowed by darkness. The Egyptians told this story not as a simple fable, but as a blueprint for living. They said, "Love fully, devote yourself to the good, honor truth, and act with courage." Even the gods struggled, yet they persevered. If divine beings could rise above betrayal and despair, so could humanity. Every temple, every papyrus, every amulet of Isis carried fragments of this tale. Women prayed to her for fertility, for protection of family, for guidance when grief seemed unbearable. Fishermen looked to the Nile, remembering the goddess whose tears shaped the very waters that sustained them. Osiris's presence was as constant as the river's flow. His green skin symbolized vegetation and renewal. His crook and flail were emblems of both authority and protection. And his throne, though hidden in the duat, reflected the ultimate truth. Power belongs to those who serve, not to those who take. Together, Isis and Osiris embodied harmony. They were the bridge between worlds, between the living and the dead, between man and God, between chaos and order. Even Set, in his fury, could not disrupt the balance forever, because love, when anchored in devotion and truth, was stronger than envy, stronger than death, stronger than time. The Egyptians believed that every act of kindness, every prayer, every offering to the dead echoed the devotion of Isis. The sacred rituals, from simple libations to grand festivals, honored not just Osiris's resurrection, but the eternal lesson of love that survives betrayal and suffering. And so, the Nile became more than a river. It became a testament, a liquid thread linking heaven and earth, past and present, life and afterlife. Its currents whispered that devotion, patience, and courage could overcome even the darkest trials. Imagine standing on its banks at dawn. The waters shimmer like molten gold. Papyrus stalks sway gently. Birdsong pierces the morning stillness. And in that quiet, you can almost see them. Isis tending to Osiris, their love flowing like the river itself, constant, eternal, guiding the cycle of all life. Through their story, the Egyptians learned to honor family, love deeply, and trust in the promise that the universe could be restored even after tragedy. In every temple, every story, every ritual, the essence of Isis and Osiris survives. The goddess teaches devotion, patience, and courage. The god teaches justice, resurrection, and the eternal balance of life. And even now, when we read their tale, watch the sun rise over a river, or hear the whisper of water against reeds, we are touched by the same magic. We are reminded that life, death, and love are interwoven, and that even in loss, we can find reunion.
The final dawn, Egypt's myths woven into eternity. The desert is quiet. The Nile glimmers like liquid silver beneath the first blush of dawn. But if you listen closely, you can feel the heartbeat of eternity pulsing through sand, stone, and sky. For today is not merely morning,
It is the culmination of millennia, a moment where gods and mortals, love and fury, chaos and order, all converge into one endless rhythm. In the beginning there was none, the primeval waters, silent and infinite. From that watery void arose Atum, who breathed existence into the world. Shu and Tefnut brought air and moisture. Gabe and Nut gave land and sky. And through them all, life stirred, unsteady, fragile, yet miraculous. Creation was not a single act. It was a symphony, each god contributing a note, each myth a chord in the music of the universe. Through the ages, gods walked among men. They were not distant, unfeeling beings. They breathed with mortals, laughed with children, wept when hearts broke, and raged when order was defied. Ra sailed across the sky, the eye of Horus vigilant and unwavering. Hathor danced in the moonlight, her laughter spinning gold from sorrow. Set, the god of storms, raged in the desert, reminding all that chaos is as necessary as calm. And still Isis and Osiris loved, their devotion shaping rivers and souls alike, teaching mortals that resurrection is not only for the gods, but for hearts that endure through loss and pain. The world of Egypt was a living story. Every sunrise carried the promise of Ra's victory over darkness. Every harvest reflected the blessings of Isis and Osiris. Every flood of the Nile mirrored the primeval waters of Nun, bringing destruction and renewal, reminding all life that endings are always beginnings in disguise. The falcon soared, wings stretching across the heavens, its keen eyes watching over justice, balance, and destiny. Every pharaoh was Horus reborn, a mortal echo of divine triumph, measured not by might alone, but by their devotion to Ma'at, truth, balance, and harmony. But no myth was complete without tension. Even the gods struggled. Even the greatest love faced trial. Set's chaos collided with order. Horus's vengeance turned to understanding. And every act of destruction birthed new life. The Egyptians knew that beauty and terror coexist. Their temples, adorned with gold and lapis, depicted battles, dances, and celestial journeys. Their scrolls told of snakes swallowing suns, stars as souls, and rivers flowing between worlds. It was all connected. Creation, destruction, love, death, and rebirth were threads in a single tapestry, the eternal story of existence itself. The hearts of mortals mirrored the deeds of the divine. They loved as Hathor taught, forgave as Isis and Osiris modeled, fought for justice as Horus commanded, and lived in harmony with the rhythms of Ra's bark. Death, too, was not an end. The Book of the Dead guided souls through Duat, past trials and scales, toward a luminous horizon where life continued in the fields of reeds. Every act, every prayer, every tear was woven into the eternal fabric of Egypt. Even the smallest moments were sacred. The first lotus blooming at dawn, a child laughing beside the river, a priest murmuring a spell over a tomb. Each was a reflection of divine rhythm, a note in the symphony begun at creation. The Egyptians did not separate life from myth. To them, every heartbeat echoed the stories of gods. Every shadow, every ripple of water, every gust of wind was a whisper from eternity. As the final dawn breaks, the myths converge. Atum's creation continues through every breath of wind. Ra's bark rises again in golden glory. Horus watches from the skies, vigilant. Hathor's laughter dances through moonlight, even as the sun climbs. Isis and Osiris, reunited forever, bless the living and the dead. Even Set roams the desert, a reminder that chaos is never far, and that balance demands vigilance. All threads, all stories, all lives intertwine in a single truth. Existence is sacred, fragile, beautiful, and eternal. Close your eyes and imagine this. The Nile flows beneath stars still bright from the night. The wind carries whispers of gods and mortals alike. You feel the pulse of the universe beneath your skin, the same pulse that guided pharaohs, priests, and Khazans. The myths of Egypt are not relics, they are living dreams. Each breath you take echoes the creation of Atum, the flight of Horus, the laughter of Hathor, the devotion of Isis, and the enduring light of Ra. You are part of it now. Every thought, every heartbeat, every quiet action weaves into the tapestry of eternity. The sun will rise, the river will flow, the stories will continue, forever, timelessly, beautifully. And in this grand design, you too are seen, remembered, and held within the myths that never end.